Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. My name is Taylor Rockwell. We are excited to have you here as we continue our series looking at domestic football in the countries that have qualified for the 2026 World Cup. We've done New Zealand, Uzbekistan, Japan, and most recently Argentina, to name just a few. This week, it's Morocco. Graham Ruthven, the opening question for you, the obvious question that we all want to know. Prior to deciding we are going to talk Morocco, if I asked you to talk about Moroccan football or K-pop demon hunters, which one would you have more insight into like 2 days ago?
Oh, I mean, I feel like I'm mainlining K-pop demon hunters in our house at the moment. Not my choice, of course, but
Oh, man.
yeah, maybe it might be K-pop demon hunters now. Although I've done a couple of newsletters about Moroccan football, it feels like it's a particularly interesting time with Moroccan football.
Definitely.
Right now. They are on a path to becoming like the predominant African football country. That's very much the king's plans, and he's ploughing cash into infrastructure, and they've got two incredible stadiums that are being built for the 2030 World Cup, one of which is already finished and the other one will be finished by the time that they host AFCON later this year. So it's definitely an exciting time. And of course, the last World Cup, Morocco made the semi-finals, the first African team, the first CAF team to make it that far. So definitely an exciting time to be interested in Moroccan football that I think, in some sense at least, does carry over to the domestic league, if not as emphatically as it does with the national team.
I think that's a fair summary of things. I will say I think we also try to keep these episodes evergreen, and I may have dated us somewhat with the K-pop demon hunters reference. Maybe that will be timeless. We'll find out.
Maybe.
Graham, I'm going to start off with a new question. I don't usually ask you, but I think it's a good way to get into this. Have you seen the Moroccan League prior to this episode? Because Graham has watched many, 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 many leagues. If there's one person who might have watched it, it would be you. But I also think that kind of tells us the level that we're talking about, the level of exposure we're talking about.
I don't think so. No, I had some exposure to Vidad. Obviously played in the Club World Cup in the summer, and I've definitely watched a couple of, or more than a couple actually, a handful of like CAF Champions League games when I've written about that competition, and Moroccan teams have been prominent in that. But in terms of the actual domestic league, I'm pretty sure before this episode, no, my exposure to it wasn't great.
Yep, I think I've seen like clips of crowd footage because you get some really great tifos, some really great choreography with the supporters. I can't say I've watched a ton of the league itself. So let's dive into it, shall we? Should we go straight to the history?
Let's do it. Or the name first. Shall we start with the name, because it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So it's called the Botola Pro. Most people just call it the Botola, and that word is an Arabic word that loosely translates to the championship, or the champo, I guess. The Moroccan champo.
The champo.
Or
the Botolo.
Or the league, or it's like just a general term for like the tournament, the competition, the league, the Botola.
And so prior to the league starting, which I believe the official date for that would be 1956, which is just after Moroccan independence from France, you do have football introduced into the country during French occupation or French like cohabitation, depending on the source you're reading. But between 1910s and the 1950s, the Royal Moroccan Federation, Football Federation, FRMF, you'll see it abbreviated, founded in 1955, just before independence. Then you have independence, then you have the league beginning, and it's initially, to my research, amateur and semi-professional, and as a result, struggled with semi-pro issues of debt, delayed wages. You don't really understand the financial models behind them. It's difficult to kind of keep consistency in clubs, and we don't really get the fine-tuning of Moroccan football until the 21st century.
Yeah, and incredibly late as well, and not just the 21st century. I mean, I would have been surprised if you told me that at the turn of the century, Taylor, that's when the league goes professional. It's not until 2011, in my research, that I found that the league is fully professional. That's not to say that there weren't professional teams. Of course they were. But it wasn't mandated that to be a top division team you had to be professional until 2011. So we're talking like 14 years ago. And this was, unsurprisingly, a big growth period for the league. It's when the league starts to attract more sponsorship and a TV deal as well, which the TV deal today is worth $15 million a season, which by African standards and even some like European standards, that's more than what the SPFL gets in Scotland. So there's a decent TV deal that's in place. And we are talking about a country that has a population of 38 million people, a country that is mad about soccer. It's the number one sport in the country by a mile. So there's real potential for the league, but I was pretty stunned that when I learned that it wasn't until 2011 that it actually went fully professional.
Yep, and these are part of the larger reforms that you kind of alluded to earlier from, I believe it's Mohammed VI of Morocco, where you basically start to get sort of reforms in sport with a target of becoming a more developed soccer nation and maybe the strongest domestic league in Africa at that. So that's when you get the start of the Mohammed VI Football Academy, which I believe they begin work on in 2009. It opens in 2010, and it's essentially a youth football training and education center and facility near Rabat, the nation's capital. The goal is to identify, train, educate young Moroccan players as teenagers and even a little bit younger, usually in underprivileged areas. So you get a kind of sports study curriculum. You are educating students so that if they don't go into professional football, then they can still have careers and have a little bit of education behind them. But it does also produce plenty of talents. Yusuf Nesri is probably the one, and Nasiri, is the one that maybe people are most familiar with, but Azzedine Ounahi, who was a key player for them in that last World Cup run, Naif Aguerd as well, just a few who've come through that facility. But that, to me, coincides with the opening of that academy is 2010. The league goes fully professional in 2011. I think you still have like some state-owned companies that are then owning clubs, but you have professional players, you have salaries, you have wages, you have an attempt to run things in a more modern, streamlined way.
Yeah, and I think King Mohammed has ploughed a lot of money into infrastructure around the national team, around this academy, but also, and this is where I might be wrong, I tried to look at whether the king had actually bought into clubs in terms of ownership. I couldn't find anything. I thought this might be a sort of PIF Saudi sovereign fund situation where they're taking ownership of the clubs. I couldn't find any evidence of that, and so it just seems like there's regional centres that certain clubs use as their daily training base, and it just seems like the king has gifted those things to the club, with the idea of servicing this broader ambition of Morocco becoming such a soccer powerhouse in Africa and in the world. And also, it's not just soccer, it's sport as well. Morocco wants to host the Olympics in the future. They are frankly disappointed that the World Cup in 2030 isn't going to be theirs alone. They bid for the last 3 World Cups. I think they'll go for another one in the future. So yeah, when we're talking about this league and maybe some of the improvements that have been made, it's all part of this larger plan that essentially comes from the king.
Yep. And I think it's worth drilling down on the idea of the success of Moroccan football, because for the league to have only gone professional in 2011, you still have had lots of success in Africa prior to that and after that, which I think speaks to the lack of development in terms of consistency across different nations in Africa, not just when it comes to soccer, but in many aspects. And so I think, by contrast, there is more of a sustained legacy of Moroccan teams doing well in the CAF Champions League. You have ASFAR, or ASFAR, the Royal Army Club. They win it in 1985. You've got Wydad Casablanca, you mentioned them. They win it in 92, 2017, 2022. Raja Casablanca, their crosstown rivals, win it in the 80s and 90s as well. I think they've won it 3 times. So there is kind of an established legacy of Moroccan clubs that has then kicked on and even elevated since that move to professionalism.
Yeah, and those 3 clubs I think are often classed as the big 3, so Wydad, Raja, and ASFAR, if that's how you pronounce that, probably incorrectly, I presume. It's
an acronym that is, I think, French, but yeah, the Army Club is basically what I would go with, the Royal Army Club.
And out of those 3, Wydad, they've won the most titles. They've won it, domestic titles, that is, not the CAF Champions League, as you were talking about, Taylor. They've won the Botola 22 times in their history. Then you have Raja on 13. Then FAR have 13 as well. And those 3 clubs, they've all won titles in recent seasons. So it's not like a sort of... Sometimes when we do these run-throughs of big clubs, there'll be a team that won a bunch of titles in the 50s and 60s, and they're not really relevant. These teams are still, not just in terms of success, but in terms of their fan base, their attendances, they're still very much like the big boys of Moroccan domestic football. And the biggest rivalry is between the 2 Casablanca clubs. Yes, that's Wydad and Raja. They dominated the early years of the league. And that rivalry is one of the most interesting rivalries in African football because it's a contest with all kinds of politics and identity wrapped up in it. Raja were founded by union workers, so they have a reputation for being the club of the working class and the club of the people.
Member owned and operated, right, since their inception?
Yeah. That's right, yeah. So kind of similar to like a Barcelona Socios model. And then Wydad are seen more as the club of sort of like the establishment, and they also have supporters across Morocco a little bit more. So they're similar to like a Juventus or a Manchester United in that regard.
But I think they, reading about their history a little bit, Wydad, they're founded in 1937, and they're initially founded as a water polo team, which is a little confusing until you realize that it's basically intentionally as a way to give indigenous Moroccans access to swimming pools, which they might not have had during French occupation. And that is always such an interesting thing about, maybe it's more ubiquitous than I realize, but I think of it as being a sort of Eastern European, Middle East, and I guess North Africa thing of having like football clubs that have 30 different sports played under them. And my first introduction to it was in Turkey, where like Beşiktaş is Beşiktaş JK, and the J is for gymnastic, because they were founded as a gymnastic club, and now they have tennis and basketball and football and water polo and lots of other things. And it feels to me like there are a number of those instances in Moroccan football where I think all three of the clubs we're talking about have different sports played at different levels. Football definitely usually the dominant one, and very much the case with all of these three clubs we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, there's countless examples across Europe. Like Barcelona have, and Real Madrid are like sports clubs. They've got basketball teams. I'm pretty sure Real Madrid have other sports teams as well. So you're absolutely right, Taylor. And of course, Morocco, yes, a CAF nation, very much an African nation, but just across the water from Spain and from continental Europe. So,
which I think is part of, like, I think it's Morocco that is mentioned in Ted Lasso when there's the billionaire African owner played by Sam Richardson who wants to like take Sam and bring him to the African League, and he's I think bought one of the Casablanca clubs in that fictional reality. But I think that does sort of speak to why there would be appeal here, because it is still like they're in CAF, they are an African nation, but there is obviously the strong connection to the Middle East as well. With the Mediterranean, there is connection to all the Mediterranean countries historically and in present day. And so I think Morocco in that way has like a leg up on a lot of other nations that do in Africa that do want to be a more established kind of proving ground for talents to go to develop and then move on. It seems like Morocco has kind of identified that as an opportunity, and the king has put in the money to kind of allow that to grow a bit. And if you look, to my understanding, if you look at the league at present, it's very much an export-based league. In 2023, that was the most recent number I saw, Botola Pro clubs sold 131 players to foreign clubs, most of them in Europe, for a combined total of $8.5 million in transfer fees, which isn't that big of an amount, but those players were replaced by 152 incomings for less than $1 million. I think it was 0.85, so $850,000 basically was the amount spent on players coming in, which is somewhat because they're going for like younger talent, less known talent that they can then identify. But I think a lot of it is because they're looking to develop their own talent and really go for that homegrown model so that you're building up the infrastructure while also still exporting it abroad so you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's very much an export league, and some of that is geographical, obviously being closer to Europe, but some of it is cultural as well, right, where you have a lot of Moroccan diaspora in Europe. And if you look at a lot of their big name players in the national team right now, Achraf Hakimi, for example, I think it was born in Madrid.
Sorry to jump, Graham. I think it was, I want to say, I did this math when I previewed Morocco for that last World Cup, and I want to say it was like 14 of the 23 were born not in Morocco.
It's a huge number. Yes, Achraf Hakimi, Brahim Diaz as well, born in Malaga. So a lot of Spanish overlap there, a lot of French
Dutch
overlap. Yeah, Dutch. Sofiane
Weirdly.
Amrabat is born in the Netherlands as well. So Morocco on that side of things, things are ticking along nicely. They get a steady stream of talent, top level talent as well, coming from the diaspora. And I think the idea now is to have a pipeline of, or a more reliable pipeline of domestic talent now to feed into the national team as well. So it's very much in their interest to have a domestic league that is sending players to Europe readily. And when you've got the national team making semi-finals of World Cups and doing well in continental competitions, those teams become more attractive. Like even Wydad being in the Club World Cup, I have to imagine has bolstered their reputation in some respect. So it very much does feel like that trade route is not going to slow down anytime soon. If anything, they're going to be sending more players to Europe, which they hope will benefit the national team.
And would benefit me in terms of being able to know players who came through the Moroccan system. Because, like, holding my hands up and being totally honest, when we do these types of previews, when we do these types of kind of reviews of domestic football in different countries, there tends to be names that we know or have known in the past. And so there's at least a few that we can kind of point to. Graham, I'm going to guess you are diligent in your research and your intense familiarity with both K-pop Demon Hunters and the Moroccan League. You'll have a few names, but I really struggled with like the godfather of Moroccan football and the Black Pearl of Moroccan football. All names that maybe I should know, but I do not know.
The only one that resonated for me, historically anyway, was Mustafa Hadji, who was one of the best African players of the late 90s. Not that I could have told you a huge amount about him, but I definitely recognise that name. He's considered one of the best players in Moroccan League history. Salahuddin Basir was another one in the 90s, apparently was a big figure in African football. And then the current Morocco manager, Regragui, he played for FAR Rabat in the 90s as well and was a very important player for them. So I guess I know who he is, but not so much as a player. Currently, you've got guys like Mamadou Kamara, who plays for RS Berkane, who actually are the current reigning champions of the Botola Pro. They won the title last season. That was their first ever, top flight title. He has been linked, Kamara, he's been linked with teams in England recently, including Stoke City. He's a 22-year-old midfielder, very good on both sides of the ball by all accounts. I'm not going to pretend that I've watched a whole lot of him or really any of him, but has the scouting report is strong on him, so maybe he's one of those players who's going to head to Europe relatively soon. Munir Chouar, if that's how you pronounce that, sounds like a French name, is another star of that current Berkane team. He is a 26-year-old former France U21 winger. Berkane have a lot of high-quality players right now. It seems like they've been able to hang on to them for a little bit longer because they're going to be playing they're already playing in the CAF Champions League this season. I think they're going through qualifying right now, and that's such a huge deal for Berkane. I don't think they've ever played in that competition before. Ismail Kandous is another one. He's a centre-back who is already in the Moroccan national team. So there is quality in the Moroccan domestic league, but even the guys that you would say have a high ceiling, you've not really heard of them, but also they're looking to use that league as a springboard to get to Europe. I think a lot of these guys will be doing that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to laugh like dismissively there, Graham. It was just another one of the instances in which you can hear the question mark and you're like, so there is quality? And I think that is the case, right? That if you see the senior Moroccan national team, you are going to have domestic football represented. I think 2 of the 3 most recent goalkeepers are domestic players. You've got a defender in there. Now I'm scrolling through it. And then in other squads, you've had a couple more goalkeepers, a couple more defenders. But when you're looking at the kind of key attacking contributors, the key midfield operators, those tend to be players already playing in Europe or part of the kind of Moroccan diaspora that we already mentioned. And I do wonder if that changes, and when it changes. I don't think it necessarily changes by, say, the 2030 World Cup even, but it does feel like the groundwork they are laying to be more consistent in their competitiveness.
Well, it feels like maybe they shouldn't want that to change, right? Because you go through the Moroccan national team right now, and I'm doing the Badge FC thing here, or Flag FC as in Wikipedia, but they have a squad full of players who are playing in the Big 5 European leagues, which they probably want to retain, right? I just can't envisage a scenario where the Moroccan league is ever kind of competing at that level. So the ideal scenario for them is to be sending players to those leagues, and by the time they rise up to the national team, then that's how they're sort of represented. But I think there was 4. Taylor, it sounds like you've maybe got the squad in front of you. There were 4 domestic best players in the September camp. 2 of them were goalkeepers, and obviously that's behind Bono, who is probably the best African goalkeeper right now. So those guys aren't really getting a look in. So it feels like there's a balance to be struck here where actually they maybe don't want too much domestic representation within their squads, but maybe if some more of those players are coming through that academy that you talked about, the King Mohammed Academy and some of these clubs, that would be a good place to be. Yeah,
I think I was clumsy in what I was saying. I think the point I was trying to get to is the idea that with a lot of the names that we do know, Hakimi, for example, or like Hakim Ziyech before, those are players that were born in Spain and the Netherlands, respectively, that then chose to play for Morocco, but they are kind of players already in Europe playing for European clubs who are then going to represent Morocco. And my assumption is that the goal is that you have more players coming through the domestic league and then being sold. And so you kind of replace the existing model with the developmental model. And so, I think you're totally right. We will, if that goes to plan, we will continue to see the kind of pipelines that I think already exist into Spain and into the Netherlands continue to be open, as well as, say, Egypt and probably some of your oil-rich nations, because you do have representation in Saudi Arabia, certainly for the Moroccan national team. So I think that is kind of what I assume their goal to be a very strong league, if not the strongest league in Africa, potentially the Middle East, but also still then have the kind of marketability and developmental ability to sell those players on for good amounts of money.
What is interesting about the players that they've managed to convince from the diaspora to play for the national team is, normally, and we know this as people who are interested, certainly you, Taylor, as a USMNT fan, let's be real about this. If Balogun, for example, was one of the best strikers in the world, he likely plays for England, right? Or potentially Nigeria as well. He had a few options as well. But the point I'm making is often when you are a tier 2 or a tier 3 nation, which is still where I'd place Morocco generally. I know they made the semi-finals of the World Cup. You maybe don't get first pick of the players who are dual nationals. Well, Achraf Hakimi could very much play for Spain easily, like probably the best right back in the world right now. Hakim Ziyech, born in the Netherlands, would have a bunch of caps for the Netherlands as well. Brahim Diaz, maybe not quite at that level, but would be in Spain contention. Would have been. I think he actually rejected a Spain call up to go and play for Morocco. So there's something about the Moroccan national team. I don't know whether that's like some sort of intangible, like how strong is national pride around the national team or what. I don't know what it is, but man, that's a pull to be able to get those players away from countries like Spain and the Netherlands.
I mean, I am speaking from a position of relative ignorance, so grain of salt here. But my assumption is that when you have a sizable diaspora population in a former colony, there is an element there of people fled occupation, people fled the instability of the Civil War, or people wanted better economic opportunities, and there were laboring positions, or there were worker shortages in areas where these families could then move and settle, but still identified as Moroccan and still had connections to Morocco and kept those kind of roots in place. And so you are still going to identify with that population, still have that identity front and center, even if you're living elsewhere, so that you still very much want to play for that nation when asked, if asked. I think the U.S. has that at times. I think a lot of the sons, I think maybe daughters, I can't remember how many dual nationals have chosen to represent the U.S., but at least like the more recent U.S. national teams where you've had the German Americans whose dad was a serviceman abroad, but maybe they didn't spend a ton of time here, there seems to be that pull of playing for the U.S. and the connection to family. I wonder if maybe the recent political situation has people less inclined to say, patriotically, I want to go play for the USA. It feels like Morocco has the kind of stability that other North African and Middle Eastern countries haven't had, especially after the Arab Spring, that maybe there is still just that pull of we overthrew France, we are our own thing, I want to play for that instead of a country that I don't fully identify with. Yeah,
I'm jealous of a country to have that pull, because if Scotland had that pull, Elliot Anderson would still be in our squad and not be playing for England right now.
So do we think your sadness about Elliot Anderson aside, Graham, overall, I don't think I have a great read on this. Do you feel like it is improving Moroccan football? Because there is more money, there is more infrastructure, as you talked about, the stadiums that are being built and have been built for 2030. Feels like the obvious answer is yes. But then there's also the idea that, they've had success in continental competitions before. They have had these three kind of dominant teams vying for control for decades. So, is it kind of the same, or is it improving?
Yes, it's a good question. So first of all, I to try and rank where this league is now, I went to, as I always do, Opta's team rankings. I first compared the Botola to MLS, as I tend to do. RS Berkane, who are the current champions, according to Opta, would be the 7th best team in MLS right now. FAR Rabat would be 10th. and then it's pretty MLS dominated beyond that point. So I think it's fair to say that MLS is a stronger league. I then plugged in the Egyptian Premier League and the South African PSL, and that was a much closer comparison. By the way, I chose those two leagues because they're the kind of consensus. People argue they're the two strongest leagues in Africa. It seems like, and when I looked at the kind of tracking on Opta of teams and tried to get a read on whether things were getting better or worse, seems like incrementally they're getting better. There was a big jump around that time of professionalism where money flowed into the game. All of a sudden it seemed like they jumped the Tunisian league into being the third best team on the African continent. And the last sort of 10 to 15 years they're closing the gap on the South African PSL, but not majorly, not massively. And obviously these teams struggle to hold on to players. But I think the hope that Morocco has is that it is eventually going to become the strongest football league in Africa. But when you look at some of the inbuilt domination that particularly the Egyptian clubs have, who are still very powerful, and some of the Egyptian clubs are Al Ahly in Egypt are huge, like a massive club in Africa, not just in Egypt but throughout the continent, and so I think that's going to be something that's going to be difficult for the Moroccan teams to overhaul. But it's certainly up there as one of the strongest African leagues. I don't think that's in any question. Yeah,
when you read about the Royal Army Club, who have been around since like the 50s, and when you read about Wydad and Raja to some extent, but Wydad especially, with all of the league titles won, with the 3 CAF Champions Leagues won, there is still they are one of the 3 biggest teams in Africa behind the 2 teams in Egypt, essentially. Yeah. So yeah, to your point, I think that's a pretty fair shout, Graham. I'm excited for them in 2030, though. I am sad that they're not hosting it on their own. I'm sad that it's not even just Portugal, Spain, and Morocco at this point, that you now have, I believe, 14 different host nations. I might have the math wrong on that one, but it feels expansive, to say the least.
That World Cup, man, is... I would have been so excited for a Morocco-only World Cup. I've no idea whether they have the infrastructure. I know they're building stadiums at a pace right now, but obviously with it being a 48-team World Cup, and they're talking about it being a 64 team for 2030. Probably out of the question for them to host it on their own. But I'm sad for them that they're getting this sort of like halfway house, half baked World Cup where they're going to host some games. I think they want the final. Like I unless I missed it, the final for 2030 has not been handed out. And they want this new mega stadium in Rabat that I think they've just opened. They want that to host the final, so that would be cool. Because I'm very much on board with Morocco becoming like a serious player at the top of world football. And I look through their team. I'm not going to pretend I've watched a lot of their CAF qualifying, but they absolutely cruised through qualifying. I think won every single game, which is why they were the first CAF team to punch their ticket to the tournament. And then just looking on the basis of names, it looks like they're even stronger than they were in 2022 because they've brought through players, or not brought through, they've been able to convince players like Brahim Diaz to come and play for them. And it just seems like they've got more players now who are as good as Morocco were at the last World Cup. They played bunker football and then hit teams on the counter. They were really good at it, but now it seems like they're more capable of having more control in games and having more of the ball and being higher up the pitch. So yeah, I think they'll be dangerous again, and just across the board it looks like they are really rising as a bit of a football superpower.
Graham, are you familiar with Hamza Igamane?
Yes, just signed for Lille. He played for Rangers last season. He's good.
He feels like the exact type of player that we are talking about, where he came through. He's born in Morocco, in Tamara. I'm not familiar. But he plays for AS FAR. Then he goes to Rangers. Now he's with Lille. Comes to the Moroccan youth ranks as well and is now playing for the senior team. That feels like... And he's only 22?
Yeah, he's young.
Yeah. So I feel like that's the type of player that they are... that they should be targeting, identifying as being the model going forward, because that feels like a good, solid progression of career to get him into a position where he is now young and good and playing in a top league in Europe. Yeah, and also played for Rangers.
I think, well, we won't hold that against them. I think he went for about 15 million euros to Lille as well, so it says something that there is that path there for these players, and I expect to see more of that in the years to come.
There we are. All right, well, that is the Moroccan League. Graham, the name one more time?
Botola.
There we go. Botola. The Botola League.
The Moroccan Champo, alternatively.
There we go. Thank you. So if I call it the Botola League, is that basically saying the League?
Yeah.
Cool.
It's ATM machine.
ATM machine, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, Graham, thank you very much, my friend, once again for talking all things Moroccan football with me. I do love North African football. I really want to go see. I feel like a Casablanca derby might be too much for me. I don't know if I can handle the intensity of that one.
No, I think you could. I mean, I've not done it, but I think we could. I think we could handle that. How about we?
You've done Old Firm, man. I feel like you can handle anything. That is like the ropes course for handling derbies. I think I got to do that one first, then we'll see where I go. I've done Galatasaray Fenerbahce. That was kind of intense.
Yeah,
a little bit
up
intense.
there. Come on, give yourself some credit. That's up there.
that was something. That was the only time I've had a police officer very specifically use a very specific Turkish phrase that means like go home and go to bed. Like when they say good night, that means like you go to sleep. If they say like good evening, that means like have a good night.
As long as it wasn't go to sleep in the cell.
Yes.
I think you could.
Yeah. Good point. It was not. Long may it continue to not be the case that we are not locked up while talking about soccer. Listeners, thank you all so much for listening to Soccer 101. If you enjoyed this one, please tell some folks, spread the word. We would very much appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next week.